Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Curtis from Digibit, and today I have a very special guest. This is my good friend Jason. Now, if you've ever been on Performance PC's Facebook page or on their Discord channel, and you've had a question about water cooling your system, there is a very good chance you have spoken with Jason. And recently, he decided to start up his own system building company called Liquid Extremes. Now, Jason, why don't you tell us a little bit about it and explain how to get in contact with you?
Basically, the best place to contact me right now would be Facebook. I do have a Facebook page, which we'll link in the description below, as well as the Performance PC's website, of course. I do things like this if people have the want to do it, may not have the time to do it, but have the money, or people who don't feel comfortable with doing it, but would like to have a system like mine that you see here in front of me.
And I do have to say, seeing this in person, it is a beautiful system. Like, I've got a little bit of envy going on here. But anyway, so Jason just received some pretty cool product from UFO Technologies we'll be taking a look at today. And he was kind enough to drive 30 minutes away to come and do this collab with me and kind of show off the product as well as discuss some of the guidelines you should be following before and after building your water-cooled system. So let's get started. So the first guideline you should be following, and it's probably the biggest and most important with any water cooling system, is prepping. Now, in order to really tell this, I feel like we kind of have to start with our own problems. Both of us are on custom loop systems, and both of us have found out the hard way why you should definitely and always do prep work before you start assembling anything. So what happened with my system was I was running Primo Chill fluid, and it was the opaque, but I didn't follow the cleaning instructions perfectly right. And what ended up happening was the opaque that is in the coolant started falling out. And when that happens, it's almost like a chalky residue that it leaves behind, and this clogged up my CPU block and started clogging up my radiator. And I noticed that my temperatures, which is a very important thing to pay attention to, because usually that's your first sign that something's gone awry. And but anyway, so my temperatures started climbing up and up and up. I was having to drop my overclock, and finally I decided to just drain the loop and look. And I was mortified. All of my tubes, you couldn't even see through them. They were bad. So chalky.
Very
and I sent him pictures. And yeah, both of us were just like, what the heck happened? Luckily, Primo Chill was super awesome. They were very helpful. They tried to kind of get to the bottom of it and see what was going on. And like I said, I'm running Primo Chill fluid now, and I've not had a problem since following the instructions. So
mine, I had when I first built. Actually, it was this rig. This one's been through some changes over the time. When I first built this system, I put in Mayhem's red dye and a biocide. I think I was running PT Nuke, maybe. It might have been PT Nuke, or it might have been Liquid Utopia from Primo Chill, one or the other. I know I eventually switched to that. But what happened was, instead of mine having a breakdown like his, because I was running a dye and not an opaque like this fluid here, mine actually, the color changed in the loop. So it went from a bright red, similar to the color you see on the fan grills and the fans, to almost a black. And when I opened the loop up, I saw some particles floating in the water. And I'm like, well, what's going on here? So I flushed it out. I put it back in. It did it again. It did this. After 3 months of use, it would do this. So I finally, when I joined the PPC's group, I heard somebody talking about Mayhem's dyes and product, and I said, well, I had a problem with theirs. Luckily, thanks to PPC's, thanks to Mayhem's Mick, the owner, they reached out to him. He helped me out. He got me straight, and it was all based off I didn't prep it correctly. The radiator was dirty. Finished up prep, did everything he instructed me to do, and I did not have any more problems. So,
now, what is prep work and why should you do it? So prep work is getting rid of some of the extra funk that can come in products like radiators. You have excess flux, you have paint, you have just oxidation, not corrosion.
Right, oxidation.
from the copper and things like that, and water cooling blocks. When they machine the parts, you have to run what's called milling oil. Now, milling oil is honestly a little hard to get off of some stuff, especially metals or anything like that. So, case in point, what happened to this block here?
We're pretty sure that the person that this was bought from, when he did it, he didn't prep the block. Most of the time, blocks, like especially on some brands, have, and I'm not saying it's just EK, other brands can have it too, but milling oil to cut this metal and cut the plastic acrylic top gets left over, and they don't necessarily wash them out good. Same with radiators and things. And that can tend to lead to your coloring leaching into it. This actually has an oily residue. The guy was running EK Cryofuel. They don't recommend any kind of system harsh cleaners before their product, and while it was running, it probably ran great. But I think that's part of the reason why this block is having a problem. So we're going to tear that apart later and give it a nice wash down.
All right. So did you want to explain some of the cleaners that are out on the market?
I can. There are several different products. Mayhem's has one that most people know about. It's Blitz. You have part 1 and part 2. Blitz part 1 is for your radiator and your radiator only. You put it in there. Well, you give your radiator a nice distilled flush, shake it up, jump it out, get all the debris out. Then you mix their stuff by their instructions. You put it in there and you let it set for 12 hours. No more. 12 hours per the instructions. Always follow the instructions. And then they have a part 2 that kind of does a whole system preparation. It kind of gets out the rest of the debris that Blitz didn't get. Well, the part 1 didn't get out. It will also help condition your seals and all that stuff. It's just more or less an overall good cleaner. Primo Chill has several products, and I recommend you follow all directions with theirs. They have a sys prep for new systems that in their methods, you rinse everything with distilled, you fill this in the loop, and you can run it for 24 to a week, constant in the system. You can use your system while it's being cleaned. But that's for a new system. Reboot is their new one that just came out with their product called Primo Chill View. And that is to get out any leftover dyes and things like that that's left behind in a system that's already been running, such as like this or mine, like to get that stuff out. They do have a new one. I can't say much about it other than it's a prototype product. It will be coming soon, and it is to help in the aid of preparing your loop for their product, View or whatever. And then, of course, we have our UFO. This one is from him, Daniel. It's a citric acid-based fluid cleaner. Now, I know a lot of people are like, oh no, citric acid on nickel-coated stuff and stuff like that, because this is being diluted heavily into 750 milliliters of water. It should not harm any parts like that. Now, don't ever use a harsh cleaner on nickel-plated stuff or aluminum. It will damage it. Do not do that. Follow the instructions of the maker. And this is the stuff we are actually going to put in mine to, once we drain and flush out the current coolant, we're going to give this a shot. He wanted some feedback, so we're going to let him know how that works.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thanks, buddy. All right, so we are now going to take the cleaner that UFO sent us, and we're going to mix it. He sends a 250 milliliter bottle. It mixes to 750 milliliters of distilled water. And guys, liquid cooling, water cooling is chemistry. It requires a specific pH balance being between 6 and 8. They mixed metals in systems sometimes, usually nickel and copper. You never want to mix aluminum with anything like that. So if you're going to use aluminum, try to stick with those parts, because that is what works together. If you mix it with something else, you'll get a really, really bad experience. It's called galvanic corrosion, so stay away from that. Also, distilled or deionized water is the best, preferably distilled as it's the purest. Tap water and things like that contain minerals and impurities in the water that can cause issues with it. So let's avoid those things. So we'll see how well this cleaner does. This makes about a liter of cleaner, apparently. My loop takes 1 liter of fluid to fill. So we're going to mix this together and then move on to actually draining and flushing what I currently have in the system. So we're going to add up to, and doing Google math, 1 liter is 1,000, 250 plus 750 equals 1,000. Hey, I can do maths.
Okay, so your loop is back together, it's running, it looks stunning, but your work is not over yet. Here comes maintenance. So, maintenance is something that you definitely don't want to neglect because in the long run, it can ruin your system. Um, Probably the first thing you want to maintain and constantly check is your fluid level. Now, this is probably going to be the easiest thing to do and honestly can kind of give you a lot of your telltale signs on if you need to do any kind of extra maintenance. So just look at your reservoir, make sure that the level is right where you left it. Now, fluid will evaporate over time, so that level can actually drop, but as long as you're not having to fill up like constantly, maybe like once a month or so, you're probably fine. So just top it off if it's a little low. Also, if you just put your loop back together, you can end up with little tiny, I call them micro bubbles. And just over the course of maybe the next week, it might bleed out here and there. It's kind of slow, but just depending on how your loop was set up is how easy it will bleed out the bubbles.
Low pump speed for small bubbles, and fast pump speed for the larger bubbles and the initial bleeding of air. It helps a lot.
The next thing you kind of want to pay attention to in your loops, and this only pertains if you're using soft tubing, is leaching. Now, what leaching is it's actually the plasticizer that is inside of your tube, and over time that coolant can actually like draw it out, and that will end up gumming up your system. A lot of times you'll start to notice it by white gunk that starts floating on top of your reservoir. Things like that. Again, checking that reservoir, that's very important.
Which is usually only happens when you're using a harsher of the chemicals of coolants, because some coolants have ethylene glycol and things like that in them, similar to what a car has, like Mayhem's XT-1. I think Nanoxia from Russia has that in it, and there's a few other brands that use that. That typically is not recommended for soft, especially, and then PETG tubing as well. Now, there are some makers that make some tubing that will work with it, but generally speaking, that will break down tubing. So even though they make the product and it will work, that's what you need to watch for, is the breaking down, because it can really clog up some stuff.
Another thing to watch out for, and what actually happened in my loop the first time, is fallout. And no, we're not talking about the Bethesda game. We're talking about your coolant actually breaking down and particles falling out of it. That's something you can actually spot relatively easily. It's not going to be very hard to find. Mine, I started noticing it, and say if the tube comes across and drops down and makes a dip, I actually noticed it settling in that dip.
Now, so the reason that happens is because an opaque and other fluids like the 3D fluids like View and UFO Cryochills, their 3D or Mayhem's Aurora, they all have, and they have to have, even an opaque has to have a particulate in there. It's very fine and usually water soluble to an extent, but that is what you're seeing that falls out usually, is the solid particulate that they use to make it non-transparent, where you can't see through it. So keep that in mind. That's what that usually is.
Yeah, and Fallout is relatively easy to clean. If you're using soft tubing like I was, I just had to swap tubing.
Which is relatively cheap.
Yeah, yeah. And I had to disassemble my blocks and clean them out. So yeah, it's irritating and it's inconvenient, but it's not gonna kill your system if you catch it early enough.
And hopefully this is gone. This won't happen until later on in the life of your
Mhm.
fluid. Normally, a loop lasts 6 months to a year, but there's no guarantee, as it's chemically and it's chemistry, it's all that stuff. pH balance, all that plays into a factor. So you may not, and results may vary depending on your loop. It's just the nature of the beast, really.
Hmm. Yeah, I've seen loops go from not even a month before they start noticing problems to loops that have lasted 2 years and the coolant still looks brand new.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and unfortunately, I wasn't that lucky yet. I
yeah.
ran mine for a good 6 months, and so before I started, I've changed my fluid quite often. If you've been on PPCs, you've seen me go through quite a few different colors. So I just have fun with it. But if you're like somebody that likes to fill it and go, you could look for 6 months, possibly a year. It really just depends on the material.
And this is probably, that leads to the biggest question that people have. How often should I change out my fluid? And this is so debated on, and so many people have so many different ideas. Generally, what I go by is if your coolant is not degrading, so it's not changing color, you're not losing your thermal performance, and things like that, it's not leaching plasticizer out of your tubes, um, leave it alone.
No.
If it works and it's not broke, don't fix it.
Right.
But like we said, it really depends on how well the system was prepped, the quality of materials going in, and honestly, the quality of the materials that make the components in your system.
Yeah.
Sometimes manufacturers will source, copper from this place and this place. Well, this place may have more pure copper than this place. Then again, this place may have less pure copper and have less issues than this. I mean, it really is a lottery. Quite honestly, if you're using quality parts and you're doing the proper prepping and maintenance and things like that, you really shouldn't have any issues.
No.
Like you said, every 6 months you may have to swap out your coolant, but
yeah, generally speaking, the manufacturers of the coolant say 6 months, maybe a year.
Mm-hmm.
Normally, they lean on the era of the earlier maintenance
Yeah.
rather than the later, just because as you get older and older and older on the coolant and the heat and then cooling that happens, it can affect the coolant over time. So they generally err towards 6 months rather than a year, and even that isn't guaranteed.
Yeah. Okay, so even though cleaning ties in with maintenance, we felt like since we were highlighting a cleaner that it really deserved its own spotlight. Because truth be told, eventually the day will come when you have to disassemble your components and clean them. Case in point with this GPU block. We don't think any maintenance was done to it before it was actually installed in the system. There's bits of radiator paint in it, and
yeah, there's some black specks. We've got some of it looks like there could have been a residue left behind before the fluid was used, although I'm not really sure the chemical makeup of the fluid that was used.
Some other issues that may occur where you have to disassemble and clean is there might be crust buildup in the small channels that cool the actual GPU die.
Which are right here.
Yes, and those are relatively easy to clean. You can just grab a soft bristle toothbrush and just scrub it. And a lot of times it will come right out.
We just got some out, as a matter of fact, just by doing a light scrub, no water yet. So.
Yeah, exactly. So that's relatively easy to clean. What's not relatively easy to clean, and he kind of mentioned it earlier, is galvanic corrosion. And this stuff is like the cancer of PC water cooling. Once it happens, you have to really nip it in the bud, take apart your system, and kind of assess the damage. Galvanic corrosion will actually eat into the metal. And a lot of times, if it's just on the surface and it didn't really penetrate nickel plating, if you have a nickel plated block such as this, a lot of times you can just use a small, buff pad. A lot of times you can use chrome polish, something
Yeah.
like that.
Metal polish.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to use any kind of gritted sandpaper, even something like 800 or so, that can still scar the plating and damage it even further. So a lot of times that will brush right out. However, if you have bad galvanic corrosion,
Yeah.
it's toast.
Yeah, if it starts to break down your nickel plating and you start seeing a spot that's getting real bad, and what you'll notice is it'll be like a big greeny, like dark green algae looking spot, and when you wipe it away, you start noticing that it's flaking, or you starting to see the bare copper, because nickel's just a plating, it just coats the copper. So if you start seeing bare copper through the nickel, it's done. That's a done block. I wouldn't even bother, because it's going to cost you more to get this nickel removed than it would be to just replace the block. And unfortunately, I know of it happening. I've seen of it happening, and it just kind of sucks. That happens a lot also when you mix metals. That will almost guarantee it to happen. You mix aluminum with nickel, it's going to happen. You mix aluminum with copper, and the copper is going to cause the aluminum to break down. So nickel, copper, steel, like stainless steel, all that stuff works good together. As a matter of fact, the GPU block in here has a stainless steel plate over the channels instead of the acrylic, just the way it's made.
So water cooling can seem pretty daunting and challenging, but as long as you take the proper precautions and use quality components, you'll be fine. So I want to thank Jason for coming out today.
It's been fun. I really have been appreciative of this. I appreciate you having me. This has been great.
Yeah, man. And so be sure to check out UFO Technologies. They're the one that sent Jason the coolant as well as the cleaner that's running in the system now. Unfortunately, we didn't get to the coolant because the cleaner actually has to run like 24 to 48 hours.
Like the manufacturer recommends, we're following the instructions.
Yeah, so follow them instructions. So yeah, thank you, Daniel, for sending that out. That's super awesome. And I'm actually going to be using like this exact coolant in wifey build. So I'm going to be hitting you up real soon.
At least the color. We'll see.
Yeah. And so also, if you guys have any more questions or concerns, be sure to seek out all the different communities, whether it's Facebook or YouTube or anything like that. Performance PCs, they have a Facebook page as well as a Discord channel. And people like Jason and I would be more than happy to help you in any way we can. So
I moderate those two for PPC, so I'm usually there, and if I'm not look like I'm active, I'm usually there by DMs anyway, on my phone during the day, late in the evening. So we can always provide help. There's plenty of excellent members there that can provide a lot of assistance and a lot of advice.
Yeah,
their experiences and things too.
And I know I've gotten plenty of advice from them. So that wraps things up. So be sure to hit that subscribe button down below. Be sure to turn on notifications so you are notified every time I release a video. And be sure to mash that like and dislike button. Anything helps me learn what you all want to see. And also don't forget to hit me up on Instagram and Twitter. Links to those will be down in the video description, as well as Jason's Liquid Extremes Facebook page. So be sure to hit him up if you want a system built. And yeah, we'll see you guys in the next video.
See you later.